TX, meaning we are skipping over the 24-core model. As I noted earlier, the Threadripper 9000 series, like the 7000 series before it, is split into two platforms. And that means whereas the 9000 series offers up to 64 cores, the Pro 9000 WX series goes up to 96 cores, if you're willing to spend just shy of $12,000 US for just the CPU. The Pro WX series also supports more PCIe lanes and more memory channels. But I'm not going to be covering the 6 Pro models. We haven't reviewed those before and we won't be testing them today. Instead, I'll just quickly show you the specifications, then we'll talk about the models that we will be testing. AMD released the Threadripper 7000 series back in November of 2023, so almost 2 years ago now. And with it, they introduced the new 4844-pin STR5 socket, which unfortunately was in no way backwards compatible with the 4094-pin SWRX8 socket used by the previous Threadripper 5000 series. Along with the 7000 series, AMD also released 2 new chipsets. The WRX90 chipset exclusively supports the Pro CPUs, while the TRX50 chipset supports both Pro and HEDT parts, though it will limit the functionality of the Pro models. As noted earlier, the key difference between the high-end desktop and workstation-focused Threadripper models is PCI Express lane count and memory channels. As an example, if you were to use a Pro CPU on a WRX90 board, you would have the full 128 PCI Express 5.0 lanes available and 8-channel memory support. But if you were to install a Pro CPU on a TRX50 motherboard, you will be limited to 80 usable PCIe lanes and quad-channel memory. Now, when it comes to memory capacity, the Threadripper 9000 series processors can accommodate up to 8-channel, 2TB worth of memory on WRX90 motherboards using 256GB RDIMMs, or up to 4 channels with 1TB capacity of memory on the TRX50 boards. Both platforms do officially support DDR5 6400 in either single or dual rank configurations, up from DDR5 5200 from the previous Threadripper 7000 series. It's also worth noting that these new Threadripper CPUs don't use your typical DDR5 memory. Both platforms use registered DIMMs, so you will require DDR5 RDIMM, LRDIMM, or 3DS RDIMM. Please note, RDIMMs are in no way compatible with conventional unbuffered or unregistered memory, so the sort of memory used by AM5 processors, for example. Now, for testing, AMD has provided a 128GB kit of G-Skills F5, 6400 R3239 F32 GQ4-T5N T5 Neo memory, which costs around $900 US. I certainly do wish it had a better name, but that is the exact kit that we're testing today with, and it is worth noting there are a few versions with a slightly different arrangement of numbers and letters. Now, the CPUs that we'll be reviewing today include the 9980X and 9970X, so let's quickly touch on these parts. The Threadripper 9980X comes in at $5,000 US, offers 64 cores, 128 threads using 8 CCDs, and a single I/O die. In total, there's 256 megabytes of L3 cache, 48 PCIe 5.0 lanes with 24 PCIe 4.0 lanes, and 4 memory channels. The cores run at a base clock of 3.2 GHz with a 5.4 GHz boost clock, and like all Threadripper 9000 series parts, the TDP has been set at 350 watts. Then we have the Threadripper 9970X, which is essentially cut in half with just 4 CCDs, giving it 32 cores with 64 threads and 128 megabytes of L3 cache, and as a result, the price has been cut in half to $2,500 US. Now, because the TDP remains the same, at 350 watts, the base clocks have been dramatically increased to 4 GHz, though the same 5.4 GHz boost clock still applies. Then there's the 9960X, which, as I said earlier, unfortunately we don't have it, but it's a 24-core, 48-thread model that will sell for $1,500 US. So that's the new Threadripper 9000 series high-end desktop lineup. Now it's time to go over the test system specs and then jump into the results. For testing, we're using the Asus Pro WS TRX50 Sage Wi-Fi motherboard, which has been armed with 128GB of DDR5 6400 CL32 memory and the GeForce RTX 4090, as I'm yet to update all our data with the RTX 5090, but really for the majority of this testing, the GPU isn't used anyway. Then for cooling, we have the Silverstone XE360-TR5 360mm AIO. This is a $380 US cooler that has been designed specifically for the TR5 socket. And then finally, everything was installed and tested inside the excellent Be Quiet light-based 900FX case. Okay, let's get into the data. First up, we have the Cinebench multi-core test, and here the 9980X is extremely impressive, scoring 6,632 points, which is an 18% improvement over the previous generation 7980X. That is a much larger improvement than you might expect, given the Zen 5 9700X was just 2% faster than the Zen 4 7700X, and the 9700X clocks 2% higher. Now in this example, the 9980X did clock on average 7% higher than the 7980X, so the increase in frequency will account for some of this improvement, but the rest is down to IPC gains. I guess the question is, why are those apparent Zen 5 IPC gains visible when comparing the 9700X and 7700X? And it's also worth pointing out that the 9800X 3D is seen here to be 24% faster than the 7800X 3D. And previously, this led us to theorise that keeping the same I/O die used for the Zen 4 generation for use with Zen 5 was limiting performance in many of these tests, but the larger L3 cache capacity of the 9800X 3D was helping to mitigate the effects of the I/O die bottleneck. Adding to that theory is the fact that these Threadripper CPUs use a completely different I/O die, a much larger die that provides considerably more bandwidth. So could this be the reason for why the Zen 5 architecture looks much more impressive in this Threadripper example? I'm obviously not 100% sure. As I said, this is purely speculation based on the evidence we have so far, but it is another thing that points at the old I/O die being a problem for Zen 5 desktop CPUs. Anyway, getting back to the 9980X, 18% is a big improvement, and I should note for the same test AMD themselves are reporting a 16% uplift, which is in the ballpark of what we're seeing here. And then we have the 32-core 9970X, that was a little less impressive, just an 11% increase in this example when compared to the previous generation 7970X, but still, that's a solid increase. Now when it comes to power consumption, the 9000 series is very similar to the 7000 series, which means we're looking at a reasonable improvement in efficiency here. And interestingly, when compared to Intel's Core Ultra 9 285K, the 9980X consumed 45% more power for 163% more performance. Now we're looking at an 8 to 10% improvement in single core performance for these new 9000 series Threadripper parts, which makes them about as fast as a Zen 4 processor for this type of workload. So while interesting information, it's not overly useful given the entire point of a 32 or 64 core part is to use a lot of cores, ideally 32 or 64. Blender Open Data can eat up all of those cores, and here we're looking at a 13% performance increase for the 9980X over the 7980X, and then just a 6% increase for the 9970X over the 7970X. Also, when compared to the 9950X 3D, the 9970X is 85% faster in this test. Next up, we have the 7-zip file manager compression test. Here we're looking at a fairly mild 8% gain for the 9980X over its predecessor, with a smaller 6%